precedence has been set, so it simply remains for me to say, Buiti Binafi, good morning. We believe the Garifunna were held on Baliso before their exile to Roatan in 1797. We know this from various sources. Oral history is particularly important among the Garifunna themselves. Here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the historic memory might be slightly different. The planters employed Charles Shepherd to write their version of what happened in the historical account of the island of St. Vincent. The records of the Legislative Council of the time point to the selection of Baliso for the temporary incarceration of 280, note the number, Caribs who currently were camped in Caliqua. Other records are there too. The Jesuit missionaries wrote their pieces with Father Adrien Le Breton, describing the lifeways of the Caribbees on yurmein, in a document deposited in a museum of natural history in Paris, and there it remained for 200 years before it was published. And the travellers, well, a mixed bag, usually European, usually wealthy, with vested interests. All these accounts are likely to be different. This is why retrieving the material culture is important. Why is it important? It can verify or negate the claims of history. So let us go to Baliso. A land which nature is reclaiming slowly after years of abuse. Its natural vegetation, probably forest, probably dry forest, like the rest of the Grenadines, was stripped off to grow sugar until the turn of the 19th century, and this was followed by 150 years of livestock farming. We can see, and here I shift to teacher mode and depart from presentation mode. Cascada Bay, I wonder how it got that name. Banana Bay, from its shape, not the product. Landing Bay, this is where the expedition managed to put people ashore because the water is quite rough. And in the background we've got Batuya and Church Island. Heritage sites have been identified as seabird breeding grounds, particularly in the north, Batuya, and on Charles Island, and also on Olawash and the Pillars, not on Baliso. Other heritage sites, I'm sure you can't read them from where you are, include wells, a number of them presumably colonial. So underground there has to be a source of water, which would be similar to what we found on the leeward, on the dry leeward side of St. Vincent, where Amerindians have put wells down to get water. And one or two ruins of colonial houses, plus a carried burial ground. Fred Ober, the first point. Fred Ober in 1880, he was an American naturalist, and he wrote a book called The Camps in the Caribbees after staying on Ballysoe with the then manager, Mr. Cheeseman, presumably in one of those ruined houses which would be operating then. In this book, he describes hunting for Indian treasure in a cave on Batouia. He was specifically looking for things left by the Caribs in 1797 and assumed the treasure had been hidden away from the English in this cave. Gold, perhaps? He described being told about a sepulchre of skulls on Ballysoe, although he didn't actually see them for himself. So then we go forward to 1912, and we have J. Walter Fuchs. Now, he was trained as an archaeologist. He worked with the Bureau of American Ethnology, and he found human habitation in a lair in the sea cliff on Banana Bay. Here we've got Banana Bay. I'm sorry it's so small. It's from his original photograph. Here we've got a habitation lair, which is always looking darker from humus materials coming from people's living. And embedded in the lair, we have various artifacts, debris from meals, and perhaps stoneware. We also found a burial which was sunk down through the middle, and we had a look at the burial, and he concluded this was absolute proof. This is a Carib, a black Carib habitation site. And he published his articles for the American Geographical Society. In 1914, his date of publication, presumably this was the source of maps, like the first one I showed you, which is still published today, showing Carib burial ground. However, this site on Banana Bay was investigated in 1969 by two archaeologists from the University of Florida named Ripley and Adelaide Bullen. Everyone doing archaeology in St. Vincent almost comes to know that book like a Bible, because it was scientific, impartial, and presented facts. If it was conjecture, they would say so. When they examined the Banana Bay site, they found it as it had been described by Fuchs. The human remains, though, they excavated a little, and This is a source of great information, and it's usually done with respect to the people whose remains are interred. A femur, a humerus, a tibia and a fibula, another tibia and fibula, radius phenomena, I would guess, might be underneath. So all the long bones were together, which supports the fact that people were buried in a position different from today, where people are laid out horizontally with their arms across their chest or to their side or according to religious tradition. But those people were buried in a sit-in position with the head up and probably the hands across the knees, and what we might call a fetal position too. The next thing the Bullens did, they extracted a queen conch shell, and they also looked at shards of pottery. I put this in just to point out how much information can be retrieved by respectfully investigating a burial. The position, I've mentioned already, the orientation, the age, the sex, possible diseases that the people could have had, possible cause of death, and ceremony, which was particularly important. So the Bullens extracted pottery and had a look at it from this same Banana Bay site, the Carib burial ground. And the pottery was quite distinctive. Shards had black paint applied in particular patterns. They had ring bases on what would be cast gold, which would have been a handle to a bowl that was the size. And this is a particular type of pottery that archaeologists have given the name Calivini, after the pottery found in Grenada first. Other pottery there is from the Suezi period, and this pottery has a cruder paste. It breaks up more easily. It has finger indentations on some of the bones, and you can actually put your fingers in it, where the potter or the potter's had made patterns using finger indentation. It's very characteristic of Suezi pottery. The Suezi sherds, they collected about 140 sherds, and they date from the Calibini period, the Suezi period, between 500 and 1000 before the current epoch. They also collected 90 Calivini sherds, which are thought to be slightly older or overlapping. This did not suggest a unique Carib camp from 1794. The Bullens went further and they dug out their queen conch shell, Strombus gigas, and they took it to radiocarbon date back in Florida, and they came up with the date AD 1230 with a margin of error, nowhere near 1794. They returned the following year because, as good scientists, they want to check and double check. And they took another queen conch shell, this time from the top of the midden, not the base, and that gave a date of 1420, which was probably the time the habitation was abandoned. Scientific method continued when another archaeologist, Scott Fitzpatrick from North Carolina University, obtained a West Indian top shell, what we call Wilkes locally, Citarium pica, and they dated that, and it came with a similar age, 1310 to 1460. The Bullens continued their search in other parts of the island, and significantly, they came up with something of a mystery on the saddle between Landing Bay and North Bay. And on that saddle, they found pottery made from a different paste, a different clay, temper, and design. They called it peasant ware. They thought it was relatively recent compared to the previous investigations. And they postulated the possibility of a Black Carib camp on the saddle. But what about the treasure hidden in a cave on Batuir? Ober, going back to the traveller, learned that an Indian stool or duho had been found in the cave in 1865, so we're back to oral history. We don't know where it is now. We think it probably got shipped out to England. Duhos are prestigious ceremonial chairs of the Taino people of the Greater Antilles. Trade could have brought it further south. So Ober went off to have a look in the cave. When he got there, he found fireplaces carved in cave walls, still covered in soot. And then he found something remarkable, a real treasure. There it is. He called it a zemi, a deity of huge religious significance. He recognized it as Indian. It measures 4 inches long and 2.5 inches wide. He took this to America, where it lies in the Smithsonian Museum. So there's an upside to this. I wonder if we would have kept it as well. But there it is in the Smithsonian. Recently, another researcher, Joanna Ostakovich of the University of Liverpool in the UK, approached the Smithsonian and secured a small sample of wood for analysis. She found the tortoise was made of lignum vitae wood, a local wood, and a composite resin, and believes it to be a snuffing tube, where you could have put straws or perhaps hollow bird bones the receptacle, and hallucinogenic drugs could have been imbibed in ceremonial situations. So radiocarbon dating has taken this artifact, which was put in a safe location and published about and retrievable, and took a very small sample that wouldn't damage the artifact too much and got it tested just 2 or 3 years ago. So preserving our material heritage is important today, but also in the future, because we don't know what techniques we're going to have. Batawir is a mere 600 meters from Ballysoe. It still supports forest cover, and it has major seabird breeding colonies, as we have already said. If people living on Ballysoe went to Batawir to hunt, then identifiable bones, beaks and claws should turn up in the archaeological record in their habitation sites. And when these are found, they need to be investigated and dated, because they're organic. They can be radiocarbon dated. The birds on Batawir are so tame, you can walk up to them and take their eggs out of their nests. They live on the floor, and these particular ones in the trees. They're totally tame. They don't fly away. This is from the Atlas of Seabird Breeding, and I wanted to put it in because it's so critical that one of the last toeholds of seabird breeding is here on Batawir. And on all the Wash Islands, and 1 or 2 other fairly isolated Grenadine islands. On the mainland there's very little bird breeding, and the rarer birds. Looking at the surroundings of Ballysoe, we've noted that on Ballysoe itself, very little so far indicates where 5,080 Garifunna camped. If future research into peasant wear that they've found on the saddle on Ballysoe confirms that it's the pottery of the Garifunna, I'm going to ask you a question. Could it be that groups of Caribs were billeted on other small, remote locations in the northern Grenadines? The Bullens identified peasant wear, the 3 red dots. On Elacat, also on the high saddle location, at Petty-Nevis and at Park. So 3 locations very close, but unwanted more or less by the people who owned the lands. Certainly, Beckway would have had the Garifunna return there to embark onto the HMS Experiment bound for Roatan. Meanwhile, on mainland St. Vincent, recent research has identified sites which the Kalinago forebears of the Garifunna lived, the so-called island Caribs, to distinguish them from our friends in Suriname. The site which is key is that of Argyll, because it was a single occupancy site, And in 2010-2011, the building of the Argyll International Airport afforded the opportunity to excavate that site. A team from the University of Leiden in the Netherlands, under the direction of Professor Dr. Corien Hofman and Dr. Menno Hoogland, arrived and were able to determine the characteristics of the whole village. It's the only village of the Kalinago in the islands which has been totally excavated and identified. They scraped off the topsoil, and underneath you can see the yellowish subsoil with some black holes. This is where something has happened, where a structure has been erected and the holes filled in with perhaps topsoil, posts that decayed, all sorts of things. And these we give the term post holes. They were sectioned, cut through. This gave us the shape of the hole, sometimes wood and sometimes found inside. So it indicates the size of the posts, and you'll see some of our school children inspecting a line of post holes, which presumably, if we look at the sections to see if the post holes are similar, it would have been a structure. 11 houses were found at Argyll through this technique. And these houses are thought to come from 2 building periods, and we are in the process of reconstructing the second, rather larger building period. And here you could see the first house that was reconstructed with material evidence, because we used the same post holes. And we backed it up when necessary with records from the Jesuits. Artifacts were unearthed. This eared axe, typical of recent Amerindian settlement on St. Vincent, was found in context. It's the only axe to be found in context. And as the only people who occupied this site were the Kalinago, we know that the Kalinago made these axes, unless they imported them, of course. This identifies it firmly as a tool of the Kalinago. Other artifacts include the distinctive Kyoid pottery, named Kyoid after the Kyo River that I believe you've probably visited yesterday or the day before, up in Sandy Bay. This bowl was reconstructed from the Brighton site. It has a constricted neck, flattened rim, and small anthropomorphic adorno handle. Its form is typical of the Coriabo pottery of the Guianas, from whence the Kalinago are believed to have come. Other Kyoid pottery has affinities with the Chicoid ware of the Northern Antilles. This pot looks fragile. It's got holes in it, pieces are missing. What do we do with it? It was put together not only to see what it is, but also to make sure we don't lose the pieces, because we don't have a museum and a proper repository for pieces. It was stabilized using plaster of Paris. Everything we do, a trained person should be able to undo and do it better. Work for the future. But even so, it still requires very careful storage. Inside this pot was the last meal of these people. And we've kept that too. At some point it will be analyzed. I would guess it's probably a gouty bone, but I'm not an expert in osteoarchaeology. That has to be preserved, and we have to know where it came from. We have to have provenance. Kayad pottery has been found to date on 12 sites in St. Vincent: Fancy, Oweir, Overland, New Sandy Bay, Lot 14, Sanssouci, Grand Sable, Spring, Friendly, Argyll, Mount Pleasant, Brighton and Camden Park, largely on the windward side. At each site it's intermingled with European artifacts. Here we've got glass beads, which Kalinagos certainly didn't make. They did make beads, but not from glass. And these beads can also be dated. In fact, we have some fragments that have gone off to the Netherlands to be dated. Many artifacts decay over time. In some cases, evidence of them remain. A clay pot put to dry on a mat will gain the imprint of the weaving of the mat. And here we've got a little shard. Insignificant? No. Its significance, we can see the pattern of the weaving, the material heritage which has disappeared but left us pointers. And after firing, it remains. Here we even have fingerprints of the potter. Workstations are also important. They're also artifacts. And dotted around St. Vincent, we've got work stones which were used to make stone axes and sharpen them. How do we protect them? With marinas going in here, there, and everywhere, do we even know where they are? I'm sure there are a lot we don't know about. We need protection. Then we have the rock art. On the left, a well-known rock art site. And rock art is believed to be sacred site, a sacred ceremonial site. And on the right, we've got the newest petroglyphs that were found at Argyll by a member of the National Trust just a couple of years ago. And that site is the nearest site to the Kalinago site where we're trying to rebuild the village. But we don't know if those people used the ceremonial sites in their work. It would be interesting, and maybe in debate it can come out, whether rock art plays any role in current indigenous communities. Advancing scientific techniques over the years can allow us information from archived material culture. Several new techniques have actually been already employed on material from Argyll. Teeth were radiocarbon dated to between 1540 and 1620 at the Argyll Kyle site. Strontium G90 is released into the atmosphere in atmospheric nuclear tests. Strontium isotopes vary in different environments, and they're absorbed into bones and teeth. Now, teeth are formed when you're a child, and they don't change and they don't grow. So that strontium signature is still in the teeth enamel of the place the child grew up. In bone, however, we're constantly making new bone, and the strontium in our bones is that of the environment we live in today. So from this, the archaeologists were able to work out which people in the burials were local and which had traveled, and sometimes even the location, if they had the base data, even the location that they had grown up. Seeds and pollen indicate food crops, food. Amino acid chains in organic tissue can be used in dating them. Examination of teeth for type and wear can show age, while cavities suggest diet. Dental plaque on teeth can have pollen and food residues embedded. Starch grains can be collected from use-wear analysis of things like that stone axe if it's not washed. And that shows what the axe was used for. And of course, ceramics, the most durable, can tell us reams. Clearly, as sites are excavated, either by civil works or archaeologically, they're largely destroyed. Time is not with us. Artifacts cannot be replaced. They're precious. Cultural resource management becomes critical at this stage in our development. And I would emphasize here, because I think this slide is so important, we need a dedicated space that only is for artifacts, nothing else. Nobody else goes there except the restricted number of people actually working with those artifacts. Conservation has to take place. Some of the artifacts we find are wood, which can easily disintegrate if it's not treated properly. Ironware also, it needs proper treatment. We need records. We need to know where things are from. If you get a heap of shards without any cataloguing numbers, you're not going to know very much about them the next generation on. So labeling, record keeping, security. We don't want our artifacts showing up on eBay, but they do. Security is of the essence, and here the Grenada government has just passed a museum legislation which outlines a lot of good practice as far as museum and conservation work go. We need research in the future with new techniques. We don't want to disallow investigation that could prove very informative. And of course we need a display area, because perhaps a tenth of what we've got might be museum quality worthy of display. And if we tell the story, we need our young people, and I'm so pleased to see so many of them here today, we need our young people to train to do these jobs, and of course before that to learn all about what we know so far. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.